Thanks very much. Yes, for those of you that don't know Beecham Research, we focus on the M2M and IoT market. I've personally been involved in M2M now for 15 years, so we've been following that market for a pretty long time. And John said earlier that one of the speakers was going to talk about the marketplace and perhaps put some realism into some of the numbers, and that's me. So I've been a little bit concerned, particularly recently, about how the numbers are sort of running away with us. Multi-billion devices connected and trillions of dollars and so forth. And I think it's very necessary to actually get it all into a bit more perspective, because we may get there, but I think it's going to take a bit longer to get to those sorts of numbers than people actually are anticipating, perhaps. And that means that if we get the numbers a little bit better focused, maybe we'll focus on the right issues at the right time rather than try and do too much at once. So when I normally talk about this, many of you will not be surprised that I start with this chart, which has now become quite well known in the marketplace. It's the way that we segment our market. Very briefly, for those of you that haven't seen it, if there are one or two of you, it's 9 sectors that we use for segmenting the M2M market and therefore also the IoT market. Buildings, energy, consumer and home, healthcare and life science, industrial, transportation, retail, security, public safety, IT and networks. And then on the outside we have all of the sorts of devices that could be connected to create the services that everybody's interested in. Now, one of the things to point out here is that although we have lots of things going on in buildings and lots of things going on in healthcare and all of these, when you actually get to a solution that you're looking at in one of these segments, it's very different to another solution. So there's very little in common even within a sector. So what we're talking about here is lots of individual solutions for each of these individual sectors. So what we end up with is lots and lots and lots of solutions in the marketplace. And one of the things that we are constantly looking at is the number of IoT platforms there are out there. When we started looking at this, M2M and IoT platforms combined, when we started looking at this, there were 14 in the marketplace. This was in 2008, 2009. There are now over 300. And the whole purpose of a platform is to put lots of different applications onto one platform. So if all of those can survive, then that kind of indicates the variety of different applications that there are out there, but also the number that aren't talking to each other. They're all completely separate. And that is a theme, really, of the moving to the IoT space. So just looking at an M2M type of situation, that is characterized really by having data out there at the edge, and then bringing it through a silo type of connectivity through to the center where it's processed, and then it goes out and is distributed. And the type of security issues associated with that are not that great. I mean, there are obviously security issues, but they're not that great because it's quite well formed as a solution. But if you then go on to what is becoming known as Internet of Things type of solution, you may be looking at data coming from several different sectors and then all coming together into an overall new type of solution. So it's not just looking at the individual machines, it's looking at the environment around them as well and bringing that all together. And that brings us to a whole new set of issues, because it's okay to just secure this out there, but if you have to secure each of these individually and then across it as well, it starts to get much more complicated. But I would also stress, again, this point about individual solutions in individual sectors. So, for example, just take this one, which is transport. It's hidden behind the data thing there, but it's transport. A solution, say, for fleet management will be entirely different to a solution for car telematics. But then if you move to an IoT environment, you might want those two solutions to be talking to one another. And there is, at the moment, no way that they can do that. There is no commonality between the devices, the solutions, and so forth that go to make up those particular solutions in the marketplace. So if in an IoT environment, if you want to have something that is looking at overall traffic, for example, and looking at how you can change the control of that traffic and so forth, it's much more complicated than you might think, because you've got lots of independent solutions that need to talk to one another. So that's something that then introduces clearly some issues for security. Now, we introduced in the middle of the year, my colleague John Howes introduced this earlier on in the year, an IoT threat map, where we looked at these individual sectors, and we looked at the bringing together of different sectors, but we put that into the context of also looking at all of the platforms in the marketplace, all of the network opportunities. You might have fixed line, you might have cellular, you might have low power wide area, you might have satellite, and so forth. Lots of different forms of connectivity. And of course, in an overall IoT solution, you're going to need lots of different forms of connectivity. You can't rely on just one. So that introduces all sorts of issues in how these work together on these different platforms in these different sectors. And then, of course, you've got lots of different edge devices as well. So you've got maybe connected kettles, indeed, maybe connected washing machines. But I think more practically, you've got hundreds of different types of devices that are already connected and are already involved in enterprise processes. And I mentioned a few. So fleet management, you've got trucks, you've got containers, you've got ships, you've got aviation, you've got trains, and so forth. So it goes on endlessly. We actually look at over 400 different types of devices that are connected when we're looking at our forecasts. So, and that's going to get even bigger when we get into the consumer space with the vengeance. So all of these are issues and areas that need to be taken into account. And this little sliver here characterizes the situation for a typical M2M application. So you've got interfaces at each of these points, and that's potential vulnerability, potential weak points, and therefore you need to do something about it. But as I said earlier, because this is really quite self-contained, it's not so difficult to come to a solution for that. And there are a lot of suppliers out into the marketplace at the moment who talk about providing M2M security. They also, unfortunately, then cross out M2M and put IoT and say they provide IoT security as well. Now, I think that's a little bit hopeful. What they mean is still they're producing solutions in this area, not producing solutions that cover multiple sectors and those and multiple systems having to work together. So that's one reality check. Now, when we look at an IoT type of solution, I talked about perhaps taking information from a number of different sectors. So we might be taking information from a consumer sector, from a healthcare and life science sector, from a transportation sector, and from a retail sector. But as I said earlier, it might not be that broad. It might be just lots of different elements of the transport sector. It might be, as I say, for a traffic system or something like that, or a smart parking application that has access to different levels of traffic and so forth. So if you then characterize these, each have got the application itself, they've got their own forms of platform, they've got their own forms of connectivity, and they've got their own forms of devices. If you then take away the threat map itself and you're just left with the green splodges, and then you look at the interfaces between them, the situation is much more complex. If you're going to try and find an overall solution that caters for each of those interfaces and secures them and reduces the vulnerabilities, then you've got many more issues to cover than you have in an M2M situation. So we're looking here at interface proliferation. It's clearly a task that is endemic in the definition of IoT. And more than that, you're talking about varying security versus threat levels for different sectors. So, for example, if this is consumer home, that might have a different threat level to this one if that is transportation. And this one being healthcare and life science might be considerably different again. So do you provide then an overall level of security for each of these individually and together, or do you end up with different forms of security for each one? Now, normally, the costs associated with security tend to be associated with the services that are being offered in that sector. So if that is, for example, consumer, and you've got connected toasters and you've got connected dishwashers and stuff like that, that will have a level of security. But if over here you've got connected cars, trucks, and so forth, you've got a different level of security. So how do you rationalize the fact that you want to bring information for all these together, which are all secure to different levels because the economics dictate that for their own applications? I don't know the answer to that. I just know the question. So all of these are things that need to be considered as part of the how to move forward with IoT security. And as I said earlier, the variations between service sectors are sort of like this, but this could be subsectors as well. And in fact, we would expect that IoT solutions will gain ground more quickly in subsectors than across main sectors because they are already there. They're typically already being used. They have some commonality between them, and there is a much greater need, economic need, to bring them together. So I think that's likely to be the way that the market starts to develop in the IoT space, and then it will expand outwards. So that's an assessment of threats and some of the threats. But if you look at it then a different way, if we manage to succeed in getting to secure environments with IoT, then we enable a lot of things that are currently a little bit iffy. One of them is smart city. So there's lots of definitions of what a smart city is. But one way of looking at it is you want to bring together a whole collection of different services and you want to share data among sensors that are scattered around the whole city, and then you want to provide lots of new services for citizens and for users, businesses, and so forth, everybody that's taking advantage of coming together in a city. So huge security concerns could be in the transport system, in the energy and information systems, and so forth. And by putting them all together into an overall structure, you can reduce costs, you can encourage new productivity, and so forth. But we're not going to get there until we have a secure environment to put them in. So IoT security is an enabler, in my view, for smart city. But it's also an enabler for things like smart farming at the other end. So we have, this is a very simple diagram, but the idea of having lots of different devices out there in sometimes in a very rural setting. They might be connected by satellite, they might be connected by, in the future, low power wide area. They might be connected by cellular, Wi-Fi, and so forth. And you need to bring them all together to provide a more efficient process overall. We have now a very large population in the world, and we need to improve our productivity in farming and production of food to feed everybody. And unless we can make this kind of thing secure, it just won't happen. So again, IoT, or rather IoT security, is helping to enable that kind of opportunity. And then we look more generally into other sectors, and the industrial sector. We all talked about smart factories. Not quite sure what we mean by that, but it means a lot of things connected, a lot of sensors connected, and optimizing operations for new efficiencies. So that's one area. The energy sector is well known. We've all been talking about the energy sector for some years. Smart meters, and then smart grid, and alternative energy sources, and so forth. And there's real concern about the security of those networks. I think we would probably all agree that they are very insecure at the moment, and it's just a question of time until something happens. So the expectation of trying to do something about it, trying to move forward in there, and then that will provide us with a solution that people can rely on more, I think is a very great opportunity for, again, for IoT and IoT security. Retail sector is another one that requires a great deal of extra effort, and there's a great deal of opportunity there. And healthcare has already been mentioned this morning. That requires, of course, working with the national health services in different countries, who all have different requirements, who all need to certify solutions. They want to make sure that patients are properly dealt with, that their privacy is maintained, that operations are actually performed correctly, and so forth. So there's lots and lots of issues there in healthcare, and it gets very complicated to actually make all that work. So there's lots of opportunities for IoT security to enable new smart spaces, as we call them. But I'd just like to put the reality check in here, which is it's not inevitable that everything will be connected. Let's not just assume that everything's going to be connected. Everybody needs to weigh up the risks and costs versus the benefits. And if the risks and the costs, particularly the risks, outweigh the benefits, then the market won't take off. So again, we need to, if the market is going to develop, then adequate security is a key enabler for that. Without that, a lot of the discussions that are going on in the marketplace at the moment will simply die. And we've seen markets, the connected devices market, flatten out in several previous phases of its development. And it's always been due to some external factor that limits it. Either the economics are not correct, or people are unsure of how secure it is, or another reason. In this guise, because we're talking about connecting huge numbers of devices and them all working together, security has become a fundamental issue. And it is, therefore, a key enabler for getting to that new market development. But we do need to get real about the numbers. I've been talking recently in the press, trying to get people to understand that 20 billion connected devices in 2020 and trillions of dollars by 2025, trillions of new dollars, specifically related to IoT solutions, is unrealistic. It's just ridiculous. People have got into the habit, unfortunately, of adding zeros to extra numbers out of the marketplace to make the headlines sound bigger. But it's not realistic. So let's be rational here. The marketplace up to now, the M2M marketplace, has grown at typically 20 to 30% per annum in terms of connections. And we can see that that's likely to accelerate with the movement towards IoT, because there are going to be more types of connections made. It's not just, so traditionally it's been primarily cellular, with a little bit of fixed, a little bit of low power wireless or short range wireless. But in the future we're going to see a considerable increase in number of connected devices using all forms of connectivity, all coming together into overall solutions, so long as the security is there, so long as it enables that marketplace to happen. So the kind of numbers that we're talking here would require growth rates well over 100% per annum for all parts of the market, for all sectors in the market. Everything would have to be firing on all cylinders at over 100% per annum, which is 5 times greater than the marketplace has been up to now, to get to those sorts of numbers. It's just not going to happen. So if we then phase it back a bit, maybe we can be a bit more realistic about how the marketplace will actually take off. First of all, we need to be able to implement all these solutions as they come along. Most of them, at least in the early phase, are enterprise orientated. They are enterprise processes, and they are either introduced, well, they're introduced for one of 3 reasons. Either cost reduction, or because the new regulations come in, and it's necessary to find a way of making sure that that regulation is policed, or it's a new revenue opportunity, a new service opportunity. And what we're seeing in the marketplace actually is a move away from cost savings, much more towards new service opportunities. There's always going to be new regulations. New regulations do, in fact, enable new services. But the vast majority of the market growth in the future will come from new service opportunities. And that's what we're all talking about, and that's really great. But it takes a while to get those implemented. Companies need to understand what is required to create those services and how they're going to support them in the marketplace, and how they're going to get them through their own organizations and control them. And that takes time. So it takes a while for these things to take off. At the same time, it takes a while, at the same time, it takes a while to actually implement these things, to install them. And the sorts of numbers that we have up there, I don't think could actually be, even if they were purchased, I don't think they can be installed that fast. I don't think there is enough resource out there, engineering resource typically, to install this stuff in the marketplace. So we should be consistent, I think, or happy enough with low billions of connected devices. I think that that is absolutely realistic, absolutely achievable, and it's going to give us enough problems to think about in its own right. So our forecast that we have been talking about for the last 6 to 9 months is round about 5.5 billion IoT connected devices by 2020. Very specifically, we don't include phones and general purpose devices in that. We think that they have different issues. There is an overall desire by some to bring them into the overall package and talk about everything being connected and everything being interconnected. I think that that is, it's fine for a vision, but when you actually get down to how you're going to implement that and how you're going to secure it all, then I think you need to break it out and segment the marketplace into the different types of solutions. So it's very important to split it out, and so we do. So everything that we're talking about is not a general purpose device that is controlled by a human being. The numbers there will provide a faster growth than M2M to date for solutions that need installation. So there's going to be plenty of stuff for us to do to get it all implemented. And it's going to be a faster rate. It is going to be a market growth on the traditional M2M business, and there are a vast number of reasons why that's going to be the case. And the challenge then is to provide better security with that fast growth. So as we accelerate the growth, we need to provide all the security that goes with it to ensure that the market growth continues. This is just a second slide, and it's really just to indicate that behind that there are numbers that look at each individual sector. And of course there is growth throughout this, and there are individual applications in each of these areas. And yes, we believe the consumer electronics market will take off. There will be lots of applications in there. I can think of a reason for having a connected toaster, but that's something else. But I think that the consumer market does represent a fantastic opportunity if we get it right, if we get the initiatives right, if we get the understanding of the services that can be provided that people find valuable. If we can get that right, it's all a thought process to get it into the marketplace. So just to, before I finish, put that into context also with a number of other trends that are going on in the marketplace. We're combining, as I said earlier, all forms of connectivity, both fixed and mobile, lots of cellular, lots of satellite, lots of fixed line, lots of short range. The need for increasing operability with other solutions, an ever closer integration with enterprise IT solutions. And we're moving from a break-fix type of environment much more towards an optimization of operations environment. That's particularly the case in the industrial sector. So it used to be, an M2M type of solution used to be a quicker way of reporting a failure so that you could then fix it more quickly. Well, now we're moving towards obviously predicting that failure before it happens, and also we're looking at optimizing the activities that are currently in an operation to improve them, not really connected with a failure at all, but looking to improve the overall efficiency of what goes on in a current operation. So also, as we become more dependent on them, M2M and IoT solutions are becoming more mission critical. As we move much more towards services generating revenue, enterprises become to rely on them more. They become much more mission critical. And of course, we have lots of infrastructure that is also mission critical. We are moving from M2M IoT solutions being tactical, which they certainly were 10 years ago, to being a strategic necessity. It's very closely associated with more mission critical. And then these trends would increase use of data across sector boundaries to create new services and efficiencies. And that's what I was talking about earlier. So just a last slide, really, to conclude. My feeling is that without IoT security, there will not be a substantial IoT market. I think unless we have it, we won't move forward. So IoT security, I don't think, should be considered a cost. It frequently is. Everybody talks about, oh, the cost of including security, it's far too expensive. I don't think I see it like that at all. If you don't have the right tools for the job, then you won't grow the market. So it's not a cost, it's an enabler of new market opportunities. And I think that's the way that we should be viewing it. IoT opportunities are likely to arise first, we think, across adjacent subsectors rather than across different sectors. So, for example, within transport, within energy, within healthcare, within industrial, and then it'll spread out to other sectors as it takes off. Even within sectors, security needs and economics are very different, as I mentioned before. Interface proliferation needs to be tackled cost effectively. And we do need to get real about the market growth expectation. It's very large, but it's not monstrous. So thanks very much. That's my presentation.